dedication to all the soldiers, the brave Chayalim Ba'aretz, Chayalim Be'eretz Israel. Let them have success in their mission in destroying, obliterating the enemy and returning home safely, unscathed, and to help in the return of the hostages, that they are also safe and returned home safely.
Amen.
And for all the Cholim of Klal Yisrael. Okay, so just something very quick because time is short. Returning to the Parashat Vayishlach. Now, I saw something interesting yesterday and a few minutes ago. Just one short idea, and relates to intermarriage here. So, as explained, Shem abducted Dinah, raped her, and then Shem wanted to marry her. He approached his father Hamor, and if Hamor then approached Yaakov, and Yaakov wasn't keen on the idea, but before they even made a decision, it says here, okay, I'll just read you the text. When Jacob's sons replied to Shem and his father Hamor, it was with an ulterior motive. After all, they were speaking to the one who had defiled their sister Dinah. Then it says, we cannot do that. They said, giving our sister to an uncircumcised man would be a disgrace to us. So that relates to intermarriage, or someone who hasn't converted to it. So even then, in those times, they hadn't been to Sinai yet. Sinai, that was long before the Torah was received. And that's what they said then about the Jews, about intermarriage into other nations, especially women. Well, said women to men. That I don't think men there was potential intermarriage between men and women of other nations. That happened after, a bit later, with the Moabites when they seduced. But this was the first case of a potential intermarriage that we see.
Excellent.
See, no one was happy with it.
Yeah, uncircumcised male.
All parties were upset about it. So you can see it's never stood the test of time ever. Even today, most Jews don't like it when their kids marry out.
Yeah, and truthfully, if you're uncircumcised and you get married, you become circumcised, if you know what I mean.
Right. Guys,
well, you definitely get cut down to size, that's for sure. All right.
This has to be posted on YouTube, and believe it or not, Rabbi Cohen or Rav Simcha Steinman will probably watch the one at which you're making below the belt jokes, or probably the one that I make below the belt jokes. So I'm more worried about getting caught. So just want to share one thing that Rabbi Schnurb said on the radio. I never heard this. David Satner told me, but I actually researched it and found it was Rabbi Schnurb must have given this over in the name of the Netziv. So what actually happened, this was very interesting, Arthur, is that Leah and Rachel, Leah was meant to have Yitzhak or one of the other
Asaph.
No. Kevin, you don't know what I'm going to say yet.
Oh, okay.
So, just give me a second.
Yeah.
A little second. I appreciate your enthusiasm. So what was meant to happen originally in the womb was Leah was going to have Yosef. And what was going to happen was Rachel was going to have Dinah. But Leah said that at the end of the day, because of what Rachel did for her by allowing Leah to marry Yaakov first, and the fact that she didn't want her to suffer a degree of humiliation by making sure that she had a daughter as opposed to one of the leaders of all the 12 other tribes, of all the 11 other tribes, she wanted the embryos to switch. So instead of Leah having Yosef and Rachel having Dinah, she davened that they switch. So this did happen. The embryos switched, and Rachel had Yosef, and Leah had Dinah. Now, what ended up happening is they still kept some of the opposite gender traits. Interestingly enough, because if you look at the pasuk, it said that Yaakov was Yosef was exceedingly beautiful, it said he also curled and played with his hair in the mirror. And when it referred to Dina, it said she was very comfortable with the boys, which is why she put herself in a compromised situation to be alone with boys, for it to happen in the first place, because she was in a way a tomboy. So it's very interesting that although their embryo switched, some of the male and female characteristics didn't switch. Isn't that interesting?
Very interesting. Yeah, where did you pick it up from? Where did you say
Then it's
you
safe.
picked it up from?
Then it's safe. And
Wow.
Rabbi Snerv gave it over.
So the question on that is, do you think it happens a lot more now? Because what's happening in America is shocking.
Yeah, I thought this is as woke as the
Apparently,
shoes.
God's getting it wrong every time. You know, it's like
You see, Arthur
you
just
know?
hit on the most profound answer, is that if you look at the source of this issue with gender questioning, we're actually saying Hashem didn't put me in the right gender. I've got to be ashamed of my whitefulness and my middle-class privilege. Hashem put me in the wrong economic bracket. Hashem put me in the wrong color. He put me in the wrong gender. It's all questioning Hashem's divine wisdom. All of us. All of us, by the way. So it's a problem. All right, guys, let's get to the share. Now, what I wanted to do is just share the Mishnah with regards to what we're dealing with. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm going to share the screen because we're referring to the next part of the Mishnah. All right. Now, I want, Gavin hasn't read for a while. Okay, I want
Can
you
you
to
give me
read.
1 second? I'm going to see what's going on outside. Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
No, it's fine. Something was making a hell of a record. I thought it was outside. I thought somebody was there. There's not. It was my coffee machine. Sorry. All right. It's okay. All right. Mishnah. If custom collectors confiscated someone's donkey and gave him another donkey.
No, not from that point. We've done that, Gavin. So sweet of you. Let's go.
No, we've
from
done
that
it.
thing.
I wasn't. You didn't
Let's
say,
go
or maybe you
You
did. I
know
wasn't.
what? You can do the whole thing because it's extra merit for you. And quite frankly, you need good health. All right, take it from the top. I don't mind. Not from where we are.
All
Do it
right.
again.
If custom collectors confiscated someone's donkey and gave him another donkey, or if bandits confiscated his garment and gave him another garment, they are his, because it may be assumed that the owners have despaired of retrieving them. In the cases of one who rescues them from a river or from a troop or from bandits, if it is known that the owners have despaired of retrieving them, they are his. Similarly, should one find a swarm of bees, if it is known that the owner has despaired of retrieving them, they are his. R. Yochanan ben Baroka said, a woman or a minor is believed to say, the swarm emerged from here. And one may walk in the midst of his fellow's field to save his swarm of bees. But if he thereby damaged the field, he must pay for what he damaged. However, he may not cut off a branch of his fellow's tree with intent to pay compensation. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, says he may even cut a branch off of his fellow tree and then pay him compensation. Those two things contradict each other. Yeah.
Okay.
We've done it already, I think.
Good. Okay. So we did. What we are talking about here is the issue with the swarm of bees. So just going to leave this up. So we were saying, obviously, similarly, when one should find a swarm of bees, if it is known that the owner has despaired of retrieving them, they are his. Okay, Rav Yochanan ben Baroka said, a woman or man is believed that the swarm emerged from here, and one may walk in the midst of his fellow's field to save a swarm of bees, but if he thereby damage the field, he must pay for what he damaged. However, he may not cut off a branch of his fellow's tree with intent to pay compensation, Rav Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, says he may even cut off a branch of his fellow's tree and then pay compensation. So there are three themes going on here, guys. The one theme of it has to do with Yeush for the bees of the original owner compared to where the bees ended up resting. Other issue is, can you do premeditated damage with the intent of paying for compensation? Obviously, if it wasn't premeditated, you just pay the damages you've caused. And their third theme has to do with a woman or minor, as we know they can't give in sworn testimony. So how's their testimony accepted? Those are the three themes that we deal with at the moment. So the Mishnah states, similarly, should one find a swarm of bees, if it is known that the owner has despaired of retrieving them, they are his. So Yeush, despair, is the key factor. So the Gemara is asking, what's the Mishnah's purpose in adding the clause similarly? One should find a swarm. The word similarly seems to be emphasized. In other words, what does it add that wasn't taught in the preceding section? You know, because we learned in the preceding section, in the case of one who rescues things from a river. We're talking about somebody that finds items now, not something that was stolen or robbed from him. So if you found something, this is what Arthur was alluding to last time, you can keep it if the owners have despaired of retrieving them, they are his. So the Gemara says, look, this is what it means. It's because we've got to learn something new here. We've learned about finding a lost object. We've learned about robbery or theft. So the Mishnah in the swarm of bees is saying, look, even if you want to take a creature that's got a mind of its own, like a swarm of bees, the acquisition is valid only under rabbinic enactment, in other words, the Rabbanan. In which case, I might have thought that since to say that this person who lost the swarm of bees owns it merely under rabbinical law, even if his intent is not known, we can assume that he despaired. In other words, what we're saying, in view of the fact that it seems to be a leniency that under rabbinic law, we allowing the rescuer to keep them, even if it's not known with certainty that the owner is despaired. Whereas in the case of a thief or robbery or finding a lost object, that's got a direct Chumash source because the bees have got a mind of its own. And therefore, then we have to be stringent. But maybe if a swarm of bees leaves the original owner's hive and it comes to settle elsewhere, we're not as lenient in seeing if despair has taken place. Okay, so we're saying, therefore the Mishnah had to, in this case, because all the other cases had to do with derisa, it says even in this rabbinic case of this situation, if it is known that the owner despaired, the person who found the bees acquires them, but unless you're certain that the original owner has despaired, the finder cannot acquire them, even if it's the rabbinic. So the Mishnah states, the second portion, Rav Yochanan ben Baroka said, a woman or man is believed when they say the swarm of bees has emerged from here, you know. So it means that when you're looking at it on first glance, that the court relies on the testimony of a woman or man to establish the owner's identity. That's number one. Who was the original owner's identity? And to obligate the rescuer to return the bees to him, unless we know the owner despaired of recovering them. So the Gemara is asking, well, this seems a little bit odd, because are the women plural, or is a single woman and a man that have a conversation, maybe a mom and a son, says, no, we saw Reuven running after his bees and they've landed up in Shimon's farm. Can they serve as witnesses? Okay. And how do we know that officially that the Torah disqualifies them from giving testimony, edus in court? Is because Shavuos, which is oath, it's in the 30th daf in Aleph, and in Bava Basra in the 155th daf in Bet. Okay, so we say, well, how come it's accepted here? So we're saying, listen, it's a slightly different case here, because there's an Amoraic ruling that says that It's different when there's casual talk that's overheard. So according to Rav Ashi, he said we do not treat casual talk as valid testimony, except in the case requiring a woman to remarry. So I'm going to explain to you what this actually means here, and what the constraints are. So, for example, what we are saying is, if you've got a person of, we've got to be careful to say this, diminished capacity. So a minor, if you've got a minor, like a teenager, teenagers will get up to mischief and play around with each other, and then you have teen pregnancies, because the diminished capacity means when the hormones are raging, maybe perhaps, that they're not thinking about the consequences of their actions. You'll have a child that decides to do stupid games where somebody could get hurt, and they don't see the consequence of action. And they're saying that women might be intimidated in court, where they're going to be emotionally swayed, and that's going to have consequence. It's not because it's a time-bound mitzvah to give testimony in court, and that's why they exclude it. But emotionally, there might not be objectivity, etc., etc. I don't want to get into that, because I think the feminists are going to have a field day, and I'm not equipped to answer it. But you must know, even in Denmark, women only got to vote in 1974. I don't know if you guys know that. It was
So they did very well, Denmark, to keep it a bay for so long.
Well, it's still a first world country, I can tell you that much.
No, it's surprising because they're quite liberal there, that Scandinavian country. So it's interesting.
It's very interesting.
1974 is very late.
Did you know why, Damon? I think of voting. Did you know why women weren't allowed to vote?
Well, I think that they were outnumbering men
No, it wasn't that. It wasn't that. I'm talking about like in America, for example. The reason why you weren't allowed to vote is people had to vote for war, okay? And the men were the ones that went to war, not the women. Okay? Because men actually found out I was watching a thing on what's that? It's interesting. The men actually sign over their bodies at the age of 18 to the government to do what they like. The women don't. So when the women scream for equal rights, they're not screaming for equal rights for going to war and having your body owned by the government. Because technically they can do what you want once you sign up for the army. Like in Israel, we sign a thing for the army that they can send us anywhere, even engagement and us dying, etc. Whereas women don't get that option. Unless they contribute.
Therefore, are you saying that the cavalier to create wars because it's not them themselves they're sacrificing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
No, the whole thing is men in those days, men were the only ones that fought. So they had the right to vote. What's going to happen with the war?
I understand that. We're saying the same thing. Okay. I understand that.
You guys are saying the same thing, yeah.
I thought we were saying the same thing.
Okay.
Arthur, it's a very good point. I actually never saw it from that point of view. Thanks.
It is a very good point, yeah.
So, just one thing.
Yeah.
But
you were talking about,
you
just lost that whole discussion about the swarm of bees. So there could be two options here.
Okay.
There could be a sting in the tail, or we got to what will be will be.
And so, that's very cute.
Well, basically, buzz off.
That's cute. All right. So what we're saying is here, there's two different types of testimony. If it's testimony in official capacity, then we're worried that women or minors might feel immense pressure, and therefore they're worried that they're going to cause a benefit or a loss to somebody. And there might be pressure on behalf of the witness to lie. But if it's a casual conversation that's overheard, then what actually happens is that when somebody is speaking in a casual manner without awareness of the legal ramifications, such speech is obviously not consciously intended to bring about any outcome of benefit of loss to anybody. So because there's little pressure on the speaker to lie, it can be more reliable than formal testimony. So we're saying, if we say, oh, such and such is having an affair with such and such, and you start to hear this around town, often when there's smoke, there's fire. So we're saying that it doesn't mean that a woman or minor gave official testimony in court, rather that they were talking casually. And although such talk is not valid testimony, it does indicate where the bees came from. So obviously, in light of those two indications as to the owner's identity, the casual talk of the witnesses, and the fact that the owner of the property they mentioned was pursuing the bees, there's obviously sufficient evidence to establish him as the owner of the bees. Okay? Now, Rashi just mentioned it can't be a case where the woman and the miner were talking, and then all of a sudden the next door neighbor decided to get in the act and pretend to run after bees, because that would be a farcical situation for somebody to retrieve bees based on what is heard, when in fact there were no bees hoping to gain. So we're saying it's a case where Reuven was running after Shimon's farm to try and find his bees, and the woman and her son would turn around and say, yeah, Shimon is basically got a farm where he develops honey, and his bees have taken a flight to Reuven's house, and we hope he gets his bees back, and it was overheard as being just a casual conversation. So that's number one. So that's why it's eligible. But the Gemara goes on to say specifically, do we ever treat casual talk as valid testimony? So there's an Amorite discussion with Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi says we do not treat casual talk as valid testimony, except in the case of testimony requiring a woman to remarry. So we're saying that it's not always a blanket case that we don't accept casual talk. Rav Ashi is bringing an example, and let me just tell you the reason why and what was said. If you look in Yevamos in Daf 121b, children are saying here, all right, listen, we're going to perform a eulogy, a hesped, bury so-and-so. So the reason why we rely on their casual talk is that, in fact, this person had died, and we weren't sure if he died or just went missing in action in a war. And therefore, we permit his wife to remarry. Because although casual talk is generally invalid testimony, the rabbis were worried, and they feared that the woman would be left in a guna. So an aguna, guys, if you don't know, is a woman permanently restrained from remarrying, because we don't actually know her status. Now, what ended up being implemented at a certain point, interestingly enough, after bringing up the issue of war, is they would say the husband would write a document of a bill of divorce in case he went missing in action, that if he wasn't found after maybe 4 months or whatever the case may be, and the war was meant to last a week or two, then it could be assumed that he was dead, and he gave his wife permission to remarry. And even if you couldn't presume his status of death, in this particular case, it was enough to grant a bill of divorce from such and such a date in order that she could get remarried. But in this particular case, there was no bill of divorce granted upon missing in action, and therefore we didn't know. The guy disappeared one day, if he had an accident or what happened. It wasn't a wartime situation. But if you hear kids turning around saying, oh, listen, he did actually end up dying, he was in a car accident and we went to go bury him, you can believe it. And the reason why there was a leniency is that the rabbis didn't want her to be a woman restrained from remarrying for the rest of her life. Now, the source of this, as you can see in Yevamos in the 87th and 88th daf, and it's quite technical because you want to know how the rabbis could use invalid testimony. In other words, it's not official testimony, to override a biblical prohibition for a woman to remarry if she's married. It's a very interesting discussion. Now, there is another case, because Rav Ashi's ruling is challenged, when Ravina said to Rav Ashi, and is casual talk not treated as valid testimony in any other situation apart from the situation of an aguna? But in our Mishnah's case, the swarm of bees, the witness is talking casually, and yet we rely on him. In other words, the general nature of Rav Ashi's statement is that we don't treat casual talk as valid testimony, implies that we actually never rely on casual talk, even when there's supporting circumstantial evidence. So it appears to preclude relying on casual talk in the case of bees, even where the owner's chasing it. Right? So the Gemara answers, listen, The reason why the law is different with respect to a swarm of bees is because its acquisition is valid only under rabbinical law. In other words, when Rav Ashi said that we never rely on casual talk, he was referring specifically to matters of biblical law. With respect to rabbinical law, he agrees that we usually don't use such evidence. And in our case, when the rescue of the bees would acquire them only under rabbinic law, we can rely on casual talk to get evidence as to the identity of who owned the swarm of bees and what happened, because you've overheard the conversation, and to remove them from the possession and return them to the original owner. And the reason why, in fact, Rav Ashi used this example of an aguna is this was an interesting case, how you could allow casual talk to overcome the Raisa issue of allowing a aguna to remarry. So that was a very strong argument from Rav Ashi. And Ravina said, you're implying we hardly ever do, except in this case where the rabbis were worried she'd stay single all her life. And the Gemara asked further, let me just see how much time we've got. We've got 7.5 minutes. It's perfect. All right, guys, let me just go through this quickly. And with respect to biblical law, we don't rely on casual talk. That's the question. Rav Yehuda has said in the name of Shmuel, it once happened that a certain man was talking casually, and he said, listen, I remember when I was a child, and I was young enough to be riding on my father's shoulders as a young boy, and they took me out of school. They removed my tunic, because the Sephardi Jews wore this head covering, like you see Hindu people do. And they immersed me in a mikveh so that I'd be able to eat teruma at night. And Rav Chanina concluded it. In other words, he reported that the man continued as follows. He said, and my friends would keep away from me, and they called me Yochanan the Challah Eater. And Rabbi elevated him to the kahuna based on his word. In other words, he allowed him to eat teruma and gave him his status as a Kohen. So it says that this proves that we rely on casual talk even in the matters of biblical law. So what are we saying is here is that, okay, we're looking at a case here where there was this young boy, and all young boys are presumed to be tama in a state of impurity because they play with garbage and they get rough with sand and mud, and there's a lot of sharatzim that are found. Sharatzim are categories of 8 creeping creatures. And it's listed, by the way, guys, if you want, in Vayikra Leviticus, chapter 11, verse 29 to 30. And generally, kids are full of tumah because they play around with insects and mud and things like that. So, which conveys tumah when those creatures are dead. So, a tameh person, a pure person an infected person with tumah cannot eat kohen teruma until the nightfall after his immersion in a mikveh. So basically, his father took him to the mikveh, and he's told his friends, this young boy's friends, that you can't be around him because you're going to infect him with tumah, and then he can't have his teruma, which is the challah portion removed from the dough and given to a kohen. That's in Numbers chapter 15, verse 17 to 21. And basically, it's proving from this casual talk of this adult, when he was a boy, that he was a Kohen. Okay, because only a non-Kohen is prohibited from eating teruma. So Rebbe relied on this man's casual talk to let him eat only rabbinic and not biblical tumah. So what happened was, when you see this particular case, you would think that maybe Rebbe allowed him to eat biblical tumah. What is the difference between biblical and rabbinic tumah? Well, it's very interesting, is that if you look in Nida, in the 47th daf in Aleph, what happened was, after the destruction of the second temple, it was only rabbinically mandated that a Kohen eat teruma. And the reason why Rav Ashi attributes to Rebbe, who lived after the destruction, is that under rabbinical law, you can be more lenient. So the consumption of teruma by a non-Kohen is merely a rabbinical transgression. So therefore, Rebbe allowed the man to eat it on the basis of his casual talk. But if it was pre the second temple, that sort of casual talk wouldn't have been sufficient. The last case, guys, quickly, is there was a case where it says Well, okay. And do you still maintain that with respect to biblical law, we can't rely on casual talk? Because we established that the Brisa with Rebbe was dealing with rabbinic Turum and not biblical, because it was after the Second Temple period. But when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Israel to Babylonia, he said Rav Chana of Carthage, and others said it was Rav Acha of Carthage, that related an incident that became known before Rav Yeshua ben Levi, and others say the incident came before Rebbe. Regarding a certain boy who was speaking casually and said, my mother and I were taken captives amongst idolaters. When I would go out to draw water, my mind was on my mother. I followed my mother around when she went to gather wood. I never left her side. My mind was on my mother. And Rebbe permitted her to marry a Cohen on the strength of the son's words. Evidently, we rely on casual talk, even in regards to biblical law, because the biblical law is if a woman cohabits with an idolater, not on purpose, she was kidnapped. So what's the assumption is that they violated her when she was abducted. Okay, it says it in Vayikra chapter 21, verse 7, which seems to be absolutely biblical, that there's no ways that she could marry a Cohen because she was possibly violated. And therefore we're saying in that case where it was biblical law, why do we rely on the son saying, my mother, I never left her side, she couldn't have been violated? And he didn't know the context. He was a young boy at which he revealed such things and why it would have such an impact. Because if she wasn't alone, then the idolaters wouldn't have violated her. So we're saying that in the case of a captured woman, the rabbis were lenient, meaning that it's only a possibility that she was violated. It's not for sure, it's probable. So there's a principle of chazaka, which means presumed status, and it states that when a question arises as to whether a change in legal status took place, we can presume that the status quo prevailed, unless there's evidence to the contrary. So guys, under that principle, biblical law allows a Cohen to marry a captured woman because she presumably retained her permitted status of not being violated during her abduction if she had a chaperone all the time. And therefore, the prohibition against such a marriage is only rabbinical, so we can rely on the casual talk of the son to override the prohibition so that she could marry the Kohen. All right, guys, we're done. That's the last example.
It's good.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure, guys. Feel better, guys.